Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you guys. Just getting things rolling for the moment. Got about 1 minute, and then we'll get things started for real. But for now, welcome back. Feel free to say hi or anything, and yeah, good to be with you. Hi, Edward, Margarito, Stacy, Danny, Ray. Good to see you guys. Danny, Diego, Vanessa, Emily, welcome back. 1 second, I have to close the window over here, a little noise pollution. I'll be right back. Thank you, guys. Okay, great. So welcome back. It's 1 o'clock now, so just going to gradually get things underway. Sonny, you're asking about a Discord. Well, whatever the case may be, you can't share notes, but yeah, you guys can talk, but you can't share like answers and stuff. Anyway, though, good to see everybody. Cecilia, Brenda, Ashley, Sophia, Sonny, Nick, and all the rest. Good to be with you. Okay, so at this point, welcome back from spring break, I guess. I didn't see you guys on Monday. You're taking the quiz on Monday, so I'm working through those, and I'll be able to release the answer key for the quiz in the next couple of days, so then you'll be able to compare that to your own submission and see how you might have done. But the class keeps moving on, and what we're looking at now is just a few meetings on the topic of media and digital literacy. So we're going to take a look today at material in Chapter 11 and Chapter 10 on advertising, marketing, and the internet and media. And this is going to help set us up for the third homework assignment, which is not going to be due next week, but in 2 weeks from today. So that upcoming homework assignment has to do with finding examples of fallacies in advertising and marketing materials. But we want to talk a little bit about advertising, marketing, and the media first to get ourselves fully aware and prepared for that third homework. So anyway, guys, let's go on. I don't know how much time the notes on media will take. Some of them are a little more breezy and just kind of conversational in nature than some of the more point-by-point, bullet point definition type lectures that we have. So I guess in a way, today's meeting it's sort of going to be a little bit of a different vibe in the sense that I'm going to talk through a lot of the concepts with you, and only occasionally will I add some content to the board here, because I just didn't really find that there were a ton of core vocabulary items to really utilize in this section of the notes. But there's still a lot of important information, and like I said, it'll help you be prepared for the third homework. In other just unrelated news, now I'm fully vaccinated. I had the second dose last week, so feeling good. I didn't really have any side effects or anything. I had the Pfizer vaccine myself, but yeah, it's good to know that now I can't die or go to the hospital from COVID, which is, I guess, the real main thing everyone cares about. So I just say to everybody, when it's your turn and when you have a chance, go on and get your vaccinations so that we can all get back to normal sooner than later. I'm sure in the fall there's probably going to be more hybrid and in-person options for Fullerton, and where I teach at Chapman. You guys know Chapman over in Orange. I have a couple classes there that I also teach each semester, and in that case, they've actually already asked me to start coming back and giving like limited in-person instruction, and that started for them on March 29th. So for like 1 week, I've already been back in the classroom with just a couple students. They have this kind of weird format where it's hybrid. So like some students are in the room, but most of them are still at home watching the live stream. And so it's a weird feeling because I'm lecturing to 2 sets of people. There's like 4 people in the room with me, just a couple people there. But then I'm also talking to the camera like this. So my attention's kind of split between the people in the room and the camera. It's just a weird vibe. So I'm looking forward to it being, I think you got to go all or nothing. Either we're totally remote like this, which is fine, or we're in person, but trying to split the difference and do half and half, it's just a little weird for me. Still getting used to that, but anyway, it's just a couple more weeks in the semester. But yeah, just letting you guys know a couple of random things in my own life. Oh, and that's good to know. Hannah, you've already got your second dose. I guess you got kind of sick. I felt like a little fatigued, I'll say, for maybe a day. Mentally, I felt like maybe a little bit out of it or loopy, but I didn't really have too many serious physical side effects, so good news for me. But all right, guys, let's talk about the media. That's what we're going to talk about today. So 2 different chapters in our book talk about media and advertising. So it's chapter 11 and 10. I kind of think it's better to go out of order and start with 10, because at least the way I look at it, there was more like introductory information in the latter chapter, ironically. So anyway, here, let's go. Media, mass media, and the internet. So we're starting with just some notes that I've found in chapter 11. Okay, so guys, good critical thinking skills require that we're able to analyze and interpret information that we encounter when we go out and look at media. And we want to know about the history of media and mass media in the United States and in the West. We want to learn a little bit about how much mass media depends on advertising revenue for its funding. We'll develop some skills for critically analyzing and evaluating information that we encounter in news reports or online sources of information that convey news to the public. We're also going to try and examine how the government sometimes bears an influence over the content and quality of media reports. And we'll talk about the impact of the internet and advertising and marketing. So, like I say, much of this lesson today is going to be just a little more of a conversational kind of walkthrough. But let me tell you brief facts about mass media history in the United States. So today in 2021, we take in so much media every day. How much time do you think you spend each day just looking at a screen of some kind, whether it's right now taking in the digital media of YouTube and this lecture, or just web browsing and surfing the internet, going on your social sites, shopping, gaming, listening to music? It's really a large share of our free time that we spend with media. And this information that I'm drawing from comes from this book that was published pre-pandemic. But even pre-pandemic, the modern era involves so much media viewership. The average American will consume above 6 hours of media content in a given day. And that's prior to the pandemic. So now that we're all like locked away in our houses on lockdown and distanced, how much more so are we spending just looking at the screen? It's almost like nothing else to do, right? So we're really awash and, to borrow a metaphor, kind of drowning in media information and content. It kind of dominates our lives, but we want to be able to critically analyze it and be aware of its influence on us so that we don't allow it to have any untoward influence or to manipulate our viewpoints in ways that we wouldn't have chosen if we had not had the effect of the media messages. So going back a little bit to the 40s, before television, well, even before that, before television kind of became a mainstay of the American household in the mid-40s, late 40s, radio and magazine were the main forms of mass media. And here's a little piece of terminology. What is mass media? So mass media is just a form of communication that is designed to reach and influence a large national or international audience. So a form of communication that is used to reach a large national or international audience. Okay, form of communication. Media obviously presents you with information that's conveyed from one place to another. You're the recipient. There's a source that sends it. So that's a form of communication, and it's used to reach a large national or international audience. So think of mass media, some of the big media corporations and broadcasting companies ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Reuters, AP, Associated Press. In some cases, there's also mass media publications in the form of traditional print media, New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, even though the designated jurisdiction of the paper is like the given city. Those are in wide syndication, and anyone can either check them out online or take a subscription. So mass media, that has to be compared and contrasted with niche media. So let me give you that different definition here. As compared against mass media, there's niche media. And what that is just media that is tailored to a more narrow target audience. So this is media that is geared towards a narrower target audience. Okay, so if you're trying to use media to reach the entire country and there's no specific demographic that it's tailored towards, then that's mass media. But sometimes the media source is designed to appeal to a more selected group of people. So you've probably seen that sometimes there's specific, I don't know, television channels that are designed for some kinds of people and not others. Like, I don't know, there used to be Spike TV. That was kind of more geared towards the sensibility of your stereotypical masculine heteronormative male. And then you've got like, what is it? The OAN network, isn't that Oprah's channel or something where, or maybe I'm getting that wrong. But there are these channels that appeal more and cater more towards the feminine sensibility, like Lifetime or whatever. You have home shopping networks that are just designed towards the home consumer that's trying to purchase goods and services through the television promotions. Sometimes there's media that's just geared towards the sports fan, ESPN or whatever. There used to be music television. I don't even know if that's really out there still. I guess it still is, but they don't necessarily focus only on music. They have a lot of other spin-off and reality shows now today as well. So niche media geared towards a narrower target audience. There's also all kinds of like print media that falls into this category. Like guns and ammo is just for the firearms enthusiast. Cars and automotive, just for this person that likes to focus on cars and body kits and doing modifications to their cars. So sometimes when we engage with media, it's through the form of mass media, which is not targeted towards any specific audience. And then there's more specific versions of media that do try to reach a more specifically designated group. Now, by the 1930s, about half of United States homes had a radio. And in the 30s and 40s, before television kind of became the main norm, there were just a few radio networks that did all news and entertainment. In fact, for the earliest generation of radio, there were only these three big networks. And in the beginning of television, those were the same big three networks. I wonder, do you guys know what the big three television stations were? So at the beginning of TV, you just had three choices. Do you have any sense? Because these three channels still do exist. Does anyone even have a guess? The three major networks that are like the core three that started television. ABC is one of them. That's right, Margarito. It's not the only one, though. We have ABC, American Broadcasting Corporation. And then what else? Okay, Ashley, we got ABC. Good. Anyone want to try the others? Not Fox. CBS, that's one of them. Yes, Brenda, CBS. Okay, and then anybody got the last one? There's also NBC. That's right, the National Broadcasting Corporation. So ABC, CBS, and NBC were the only three stations after World War II in the early generations of television. Before we had television and we were still relying on radio, if you wanted to get visual news, like today we sometimes watch the news on TV or on the internet, if you wanted visual news where you'd have like a news anchor reporting something, or if you wanted to see footage of the stories that were being reported, you didn't want to just hear it through the radio broadcast, then you would actually go to movie theaters back then, and they had newsreels that they would show weekly at these movie theaters. So you'd be be like a community event. You'd be packed in there with a bunch of other people all watching the news in these little newsreels. So anyway, then time moved on. We started getting television. We had these 3 big channels. But since the early generations of TV, as you guys know, we've had a massive growth of additional niche media and even other mass media broadcasting companies. And it's having a larger and larger influence on our lives. Some people worry about the growing influence of media over some of the more traditional functions that family and school and community used to play. So here's what they say about that on page 335. After television made its appearance soon after World War II, for many years there were only 3 national commercial stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC. The increasing presence of mass media in our culture has changed our lives. Since the 1950s, more and more of our experiences have been shaped by the corporations that control the media, rather than by family and educational institutions on which past generations rely. So, I mean, your great-grandparents and stuff, if they wanted to learn information, they would have gotten it from a centralized source of information. If they wanted to focus on information provided in the media, they wouldn't have had a lot of options. There would have just been a few, and they would have all agreed on the same basic facts. One problematic thing is that in the world we live in today, there are so many media options, and there's, in many cases, inconsistent and contradictory messages that some of them broadcast, that we don't always operate with a common set of facts anymore. And so that means that some people living in one media universe are taking in a completely different set of assumptions than people who find their facts and information from alternative news sources to those. And that's not so helpful, because we would like to all be on the same page and at least be able to have a baseline of truths that we can all assume are the case. So the proliferation and the splintering of media from the big 3 to all these other alternative options has given us many more choices, and I guess that's nice as a consumer of information, but the dark side of that is that it prevents us from sometimes establishing a consensus about what the world's facts are, and that can, in some cases, divide us from each other and make us less united. On the other hand, without all these amazing media options, we wouldn't have the free or relatively inexpensive access to entertainment, information, and news that we enjoy now. So there's kind of like a pro and a con. In the same sense, like I was saying, in an older world, before the explosion of mass media and the internet, you would have also been relying more on your family and your schooling to inform you about things. You wouldn't have had so much competition by all the stuff that's out there on the internet or all these other media channels that you could possibly indulge in. So people worry that sometimes kids nowadays are being raised by media instead of by their parents, and learning things online that are not being taught in school. And in many cases, these are unverified and unreliable claims that circulate without proper vetting. So we have a sort of a pro and a con. Some people think that the world of yesteryear had its value and its advantages, but we just kind of have to see it as a mixed bag. Now, digital media, cable, the internet, and our cell phones give us far greater media choices than any previous generation of human history. So definitely, if you compare us against all prior generations, we have way more access to media and information right there at our fingertips. The concept of being able to do a Google search for people living in pre-modern times is just a wild idea, right? You would have had to go out and do research, go to a library, or check with some kind of approved source of information to find something. And it would take time, and in some cases you might have to go to school to learn it. Nowadays, we have information right there at our fingertips, so that's a kind of benefit of living in the modern era. Audiences are more specialized. There are all these specialty networks for the sort of niche interests that you may have. People also today seem to select their media on the basis of their political affiliation or ideology. And as I was saying before, that is sometimes a concern, because in many cases, when you have partisan media sources, like, I don't know, to a conservative tilt, like Fox News, or even more extreme, Newsmax or whatever. On the other hand, liberal media, some people will say, has its own kind of slant or skewed perspective, NPR, or some people say MSNBC, and others that could be mentioned. But if people select their media choices on the basis of political preference or ideology, then that's, again, going to prevent us in many cases from coming to a consensus or on a shared set of facts. And it didn't used to be that way. When there were only 3 choices, then we basically have to have the same information. We also see a disturbing trend nowadays of a few corporations consolidating control of the news media. That's certainly a concern. So if you go back to the early 80s, there were about 50 different companies that controlled the majority of media options that we all have. But by 2012, the prior decade, the most recent decade, it had been reduced to just a handful of companies, and that's what's spoken of here in the book. It says, at the same time that news media options are proliferating, a select few large corporations are controlling more and more of that proliferating set of media options. In 1983, 50 corporations controlled the majority of news media in the United States. By 2014, the media was controlled by 6 companies, which include Time Warner, Disney, Murdoch's News Corp that owns Fox News, Bertelsmann of Germany, Viacom, and General Electric, which owns NBC. And the content of a television show, magazine, or newspaper, consequently, is dictated to a larger and larger extent by fewer and fewer people and, to a greater degree, corporate interests. So you might worry that there are a few companies that are gaining more and more control over more of our media and entertainment options. The profit motive that these corporations that control the media have is in some cases a counterweight to the accuracy and reliability of the news reporting that we hear. Because, for example, they're heavily concerned with keeping advertising revenue flowing, which can affect the quality and the content of the programming. So you may know this, but how is it that, let's say, a broadcasting company like NBC, Fox, CBS, whatever, how is it that they pay their bills and fund their operations? Well, most of that, or a lot of it anyway, comes from the revenue that's derived from advertising. So allowing an advertiser to place a commercial on the airwaves during their show, the advertiser pays the company to have access to the airwaves, and then they use that in order to fund their operations. That means that they depend on advertising revenue to support their profitability and their business. Well, if you have these media sources that are selling advertising time to companies like Coca-Cola or whatever, then are they really going to run, let's say, in their news hour, critical stories about any of those companies? Probably not. So are you really going to run the hard-hitting expose of the big soft drink lobby and how that's undermining public health and causing an obesity epidemic? Are you really going to run these stories and these hard-hitting pieces if Coca-Cola is giving you a kickback to play their commercials during your intermissions? Maybe not as much at any rate. So people worry about the independence and the autonomy of the news media if it's going to be under the thumb of these advertisers that they have a relationship with. Sorry, Peachy. Good girl out. Yeah. Also, the news media corporations that I'm talking about do make heavy political donations to political campaigns. And they do that because they have an interest in some cases of lobbying politicians to give legislation that's favorable to their business model. This is what it says in the book about that. In addition to influencing the public through their productions, news media corporations also try to influence public policy directly by donating millions of dollars annually to congressional campaigns and tens of millions more to lobbyists. Television, radio, and internet all rely on airway radio frequencies to send and receive messages, and media lobbyists sometimes try to persuade Congress to privatize those airwaves, which are currently regulated by the government through the FCC. So media corporations are sometimes not neutral on the political options and choices that we have today. In many cases, they find favor with some policies that are supportive of their profit motive and the politicians who support those policies. And they may therefore actually provide donation to lobbyists that serve those interests. And that could also make you wonder about the objectivity and neutrality of some of the information that you see reported in the news. So here's a fact. The influence of traditional print media like newspaper, magazine, and then also television media has declined by over 30% since it reached peak levels back in around the year 2000, the turn of the 21st century. Why does anybody have a guess as to what could possibly be the reason that has caused such a steep decline in subscription to traditional print media and also television viewership? Why is television viewership on the decline, and why are fewer people reading newspapers and magazines? What would be your guess since the year 2000 why that's gone down a lot? Anybody with a little intuition on this? Let's see. What's the reason that I'm talking print media, like printed on a piece of paper, is going down and declining in subscription and in the market share, and then also television is also declining in viewership. Why do you think so? What's happened since the year 2000, if anything, that could possibly explain that? Okay, good. It's the internet. That's right, Danny. Exactly. The internet has exploded since the year 2000. I mean, we did have the internet back in the 90s. I'm old enough to remember some of that. But back then the internet was kind of funny. Your old dial-up modems, you couldn't use the phone while you're on the internet because it's taking up the phone line, and it takes forever. You're like 14 kilobits per minute. It takes forever just to download like a simple image. But anyway, yeah, the internet's been around for a while, but it's really only been since the 2000s that it's kind of greatly expanded its reach and its speed and data speed and accessibility. So the rise of digital media and social networking has caused declines to traditional forms of television and print media. That's right. So smartphones are part of it. Sure, Sophia, that's also related to the advent of the internet. Rhubarb, same. It's more easily accessible online. Even online newspapers replaced traditional print subscriptions. Yeah, so you guys pretty much have the right idea. I'm sure that young people would understand that, given as we are to using phones and mobile devices. Labor costs of news reporting are also providing an incentive to some of these media companies to outsource some of the labor to iReporting and those that are like online. So, sorry, Peachy keeps on distracting me here. Yeah, so you have to hire people to go out into the field and do your live reports if you're a news company, but you can actually get a lot of crowdsourced information just off of the internet. Like when a mass shooting happens, for example, there's a lot of people at the scene that are tweeting, "Oh God, I'm at the scene and I'm hiding in a closet," or "Here I'm at the scene and I've got video or I've taken audio. You can see the events happening," and put a hashtag on it. So a lot of times information can be crowdsourced by individuals that are on the scene just using their phones in a way that replaces some of the traditional role and cost associated with having trained reporters live on the scene. So it advances the profit motive of some of these media companies to save on the cost of labor by allowing it to be the public's job. A trend is also away from hard news to lifestyle, entertainment, and gossip. Now that's something that I find to be a little bit disappointing, because with the great access that we all have to facts, information, and news, more than any prior generation, we're not necessarily using that access in a way that's making us better informed, because a lot of us that are using our devices, computers, smartphones, whatever, are using them instead not to look at like hard news, international policy, domestic policy, etc., but rather who's making up, who's breaking up, celebrity gossip, entertainment, and sports. And that's even being charitable. A lot of it's even sillier than that, just looking at silly videos and memes and stuff. So even though there's more news sources today, people are not necessarily more well-informed than those of yesteryear, because it's not like we necessarily use the tools in a way that's judicious, and in many cases, we can also be misinformed by the overwhelming deluge of information that we have to sort through on our own if it's not vetted through like a mainstream media company. So even though there's more news sources, people are not necessarily more well-informed, but we do have the tools to be more well-informed than prior generations if we're critical thinkers and able to use these tools in a proper way. When companies that are media organizations do their oversight job well, then they of course play an important role. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm teaching you, hey, the media is all biased and there's just a bunch of false information out there. No, I mean, there's always a mixed bag. Sometimes there's sensationalism, yellow journalism, people that are rushing to get a scoop and therefore don't do their proper sourcing and vetting. But when media companies and journalists do their oversight job well, then they can expose important scandals, either corporate or government scandals. And of course, that's something that we should all value. Living in a free society, we want to have a free press that's strong and independent. So we shouldn't disparage it too much, but where criticism is merited, then we should be willing to make the criticism. Yvonne, easier accessibility on the web as opposed to subscriptions, waste from the production of newspaper, environmental shifts. Correct. And these are all in that same ballpark of reasons, in the same grab bag of facts. Okay, so as an example of when media has done quality journalism that's led to important insights for the public. They talk about the expose of John D. Rockefeller's oil monopoly by editor and journalist Ida Tarbell in the early 20th century. That resulted in the Supreme Court's breakup of Standard Oil in 1911. And then in the 70s, you guys probably know, Woodward and Bernstein from the Washington Post, young journalists at the time, both of them still alive now, but they were instrumental in exposing the Watergate scandal, which led to the resignation of President Nixon in 1974. So major shifts in policy, in governance can happen as a result of media coverage that reaches the public. So we honor and value their work when it's done well, but we always have to insist on high standards of accuracy and unbiased reporting. Now, there's also the internet. That's another, of course, major piece of what we can call media. The 1990s was the decade when the internet really kind of got started, and the use has more than tripled since the year 2000. Today, there's billions of people that are online, 3 billion people at least. Some figures that I see in the book, I'm just going to look at those because I've noted them in my text. Yeah, so the 90s were dubbed the decade of internet with an explosive growth of web, email, and electronic commerce. Internet use has more than tripled since the year 2000 in the United States. As of November 2015, more than 3 billion people worldwide were internet users, including 88% of North Americans, 74% of Europeans, 40% of Asians, 29% of Africans, and 52% of people living in the Middle East, with the most rapid growth of internet use occurring in Africa and the Middle East. As of January 2016, almost half of the whole world population are internet users. So internet use is becoming more and more widespread. There's somewhat of a digital divide in America, even though the statistic, I guess, is 88%. There are a lot of countries that are way behind us when it comes to like internet saturation, how much of the public uses it. That's because in some parts of the world, there's not the proper broadband infrastructure for people to have a reliable connection, and some people are so poor that they can't afford these kind of devices and are just focused on survival and getting a next meal. But at any rate, we're trying to make a progress towards getting more and more digital literacy across the board and more access to these tools. I know that one of the aspects of Biden's infrastructure plan, if it passes, is to increase broadband access to all these rural areas of America where there's not very fast internet speeds for now. So when we have 88% of Americans that have access to the internet, that other 12% are the poorest of the poor, and in some cases in rural communities. But having access to the internet helps to modernize a community, and it gives people obviously a lot more tools for commerce, for socialization, and for news and entertainment. So we want to get that out there in time. It's important to our daily lives, and we use it every day. Now, in around 2014, last decade, these are just the statistics I take from our book, American high school seniors spend more time on social media than studying in their classes or for their coursework. And a lot of people, I think, always believe they're the exception to the rule, but there is some evidence that shows that overuse of social media and the internet can have somewhat of a detrimental impact on some of your study habits and work habits. I know everyone thinks, well, I'm the one that can really balance all these things and have the proper balance, but just not to overindulge is a wise thing, I think, in some cases, especially when you're in school and you have so much on your plate that you're trying to accomplish. Increasingly, we seem to be able to do anything and everything online instead of in real life, IRL. We meet people online. Sometimes people conduct relationships online. People are gaming online. They're applying for jobs, going to school now, as we are. It gives you access to news, and it's making traditional print media obsolete. So we need to be able to think critically about what we see here and even post online, since it's become such a major staple and feature of modern life, especially during the pandemic. Facebook has billions of users. I wonder what percentage of college freshmen you think are on some kind of social media site. If you were going to guess, I'm sure you would assume that it's way up there high in the 90s, and you would not be wrong. It's upwards of 94% of college freshmen that use some type of social media site, and 25% use it for more than 6 hours in a given week. It seems to have an adverse effect, some studies show anyway, on grades, even though most don't believe that they are within that they're the exception to the rule. The textbook makes mention that you should be somewhat careful in the content that you post on your social media sites and stuff like that. I know a lot of times people use fake accounts with a given name that's not really related to their real identity so that they can post more freely and not worry about maybe their parents or teachers or authority figures seeing it. And that's all fine. But just know that you want to also be aware of the unintended audience that might see some of the things that you post. So if you post things that are overtly sexual, illegal, or derogatory, then of course that can come back to haunt people. You know, sometimes people say there's a tweet for everything. At the same time as I say that, though, I'm a firm believer in freedom of speech, and I think that you should have some entitlement to say controversial or whatever things online. You know, that's your voice and that's your perspective, especially because there's somewhat a double standard. I mean, we've had prominent people in our society and in the world that have really leveled a lot of abuse and other kind of vitriol online, and we're expected to have a higher standard than some of them. But you know what? In a way, there are double standards. You are going to be judged, I think, more harshly than some powerful people that may use the internet in a more careless and self-serving way than you're being directed to do. But, you know, that's just part of life, and we should take that by way of advisement when we're posting things. Now, the internet, some say, is the great equalizer. It's a phrase that some have used. And how is that? Well, it equalizes in the sense that it makes the discussion and the dissemination of information so broad. It doesn't take a person with a certain status to tap into the world of online information and commentary. So it kind of makes us all equal in a way. And because of that, it has the ability to assist the functioning of democracy and the establishment of democracy around the world, which relies on broad public discussion of the issues of the day. For example, in some of the protest movements that are called the Arab Spring, a lot of revolutionary movements in the Middle East that toppled long-standing autocratic governments over the last 10 or 15 years. The internet was a key tool in organizing and mobilizing some of these protest movements. You know, people will set up events on Facebook, promote them, and get a lot of people to show up. So it's had a huge impact also in facilitating greater progress towards democracy in some parts of the world that were more hostile to that. But be careful, of course, to be aware that a lot of claims that are found on the internet can sometimes be false. It's easy for a person to design a website that has a professional looking appearance, but it's not at all credible because it's not based on objective journalism or professional fact finding. So you have to be able to distinguish between what's real and what's fake, what's true and false. I would say use fact checking websites to double check against claims that you may see, especially if they're in weird websites or partisan sites or sites that appear to be trying to advance some kind of ideological agenda or exhibiting bias. People sometimes take online classes from like online schools. Now I know right now we're online, but this is still a brick and mortar institution, Cal State Fullerton. And I think it's also wise to know that a lot of the purely online schools don't have the same kind of credentialing or reputation when you graduate. So I actually know some people that spent a lot of money on like a Walden University and getting like some kind of psychology degree, but they never were able to use it because it's not recognized in the actual professional world as a degree that holds in status equal to one that you would get from an accredited institution like Cal State Fullerton. So, I mean, you guys are good to go, but because I guess you're already students here. But sometimes people are misled into these sort of for-profit online schools. Be alert also to the possibility of invasion of privacy, harassment, and fraud. Maybe some of you have even experienced such things on your own by using the internet so far. I mean, you can find weird trolls that pop out of nowhere that are just kind of come out of the woodwork that start to like make personal attacks against you or even worse. So be aware of the possibility of those things, protect yourself, know how to use security and so forth in controlling your user interface on whatever social media sites you may be using. Protect your privacy, try not to give up personal information, birth dates, etc., social security numbers, addresses. Now, they talk about pornography in the internet as well in Chapter 11. And it's kind of amazing to understand that as much as 30% of all traffic on the internet, meaning people using the internet, has to do with viewing pornographic materials on certain websites. So it's not just like a marginal thing. I mean, it's actually like a huge percentage of total internet usage that has to do with accessing pornography. Now, I mean, people that are adults, of course, are free to do as they wish when it comes to that stuff, but just know that if it's done in the wrong setting, in the workplace, or sometimes at school. It could be the subject of sanctions or penalties against you. And of course, if you have children that you're responsible for caring for, then you want to make sure that they don't have easy access to such sites if you don't want them to look at it. Of course, that's a little hard to do because you can't really monitor a young person all day for the most part. And some of the these applications that you can get to limit the access to certain kind of for adults only websites, they're easy for children to get around. Sometimes the security mechanism on some of the sites themselves is just like, are you 18? Click yes or no. So just to understand, it's not so easy necessarily to control all the internet browsing that young people will do. That's why you have to closely monitor it if you're in such a position. Now, there's a statistic also given in the book that talks about the degree to which college students could engage in plagiarism. And it's kind of sad because over half of college students, percentage-wise, have either used or know someone that has used the internet to plagiarize an assignment, which is wrong. It's deceptive. It shows resistance to critical thinking. It shows that you don't really respect the content that you're being told to learn, because you think as long as you can just pass along information not generated by you, then you somehow are entitled to the grade, which is not the point of school. So you shouldn't plagiarize. It's not so hard, especially for younger or I guess tech-savvy professors, to simply do a Google search on some plagiarized information. It's not to your advantage either. So that's something that, even though it happens, I would certainly advise you against it. It just takes one mistake for you to really jeopardize your whole progress in school. And if you're looking at the bigger picture, you don't want to just plagiarize one assignment and then ruin your entire progress forward in school overall. It'd be better to just take an L on the assignment or turn in something substandard and then just deal with the suboptimal grade than to literally plagiarize and put yourself at jeopardy. Okay, media literacy. Let's give that as one of our terms to write down on the board. Media literacy, sometimes people call it digital literacy, but since media doesn't necessarily only involve the use of digital media, I go with this more general label. Media literacy, so it's just as the book says, the ability to understand and critically analyze the influence of media. Okay, that's media literacy. It's very important to be media literate, meaning that when you go out online or in print media or watching TV stations, that you're able to understand the messages being conveyed, that you know about whether or not there's any kind of bias or inaccuracy in the information, and that you're able to distinguish between the case of good and bad information. If you can't do that, then you're going to become one of these kind of people that doesn't know where the truth is. You're like, well, I hear one guy say this, I hear another guy say the opposite. I'm just lost. I can't tell the difference. Media literacy knows that you're able to make careful and wise decisions about what to rely on and what not to. And it's actually a very important skill because, as I was saying before, we have this overwhelming growth of media choices and a menu of media options that our grandparents, great-grandparents didn't have. So for them, media literacy was kind of easy. Just take in the only few sources of media there are and just try and interpret them. But now you're in this world where you have to kind of self-direct yourself through a kind of maze of alternative media sources and choices. And so you're going to have to bring a little bit more of like a captain's attitude to steering your own course, and not just to be like a leaf blowing along in the wind with no direction. You have to be able to judiciously choose your media options and to be able to tell when something is being presented as propaganda as opposed to something factual, when something has a credible scientific basis as opposed to when it's just being put out there to make people upset and all of that. So we want to be able to control our own lives and not to allow confusing or inaccurate media information to control us. So try, if you can, to use our three-tiered model of critical thinking as you engage with media. Remember that the three-tiered model said experience, interpretation, and analysis. So first, be aware of how you experience media. Know how much you use it and where you have a tendency to go. Try and diagnose your own set of preferences and habits. Ask yourself, who created this media or content and why? Is it trying to make me laugh? Is it trying to make me mad? Is it trying to generate some emotional impact on me, or is it just a neutral piece of information? Note the message. Note the appearance of the media. Is it also being shaped by the means of musical background or graphics? Sometimes those will give us a sense as to what the agenda or intent of the media provider is. Note the amount of time that's devoted to advertising. If you're like watching TV, for example, take a look, for example, at maybe what's being advertised in intermissions. That might give you a sense of what kind of vendors find this media source to be suitable to their products, and that might give you a sense of what their perspectives or values are. And then interpret. Make sure that you ask these type of questions. What values or points are being expressed in this media production? Examine your own reaction to it. Ask yourself, is this making me mad? Is this making me excited or hostile or what? And by examining your own reaction, you might be able to ask a further question. Why are you having that kind of reaction to the media messages? Does it exhibit bias? Is it justified based on the content or not? Do you have confirmation bias? Consider this as you take stock of whether or not you're only selecting media on the basis of prior established preference or views. Try to mitigate the effect of confirmation bias by somewhat forcing your own hand to sample news from a variety of alternative sources, and then at least you can compare notes from one source to another, and that helps to prevent the establishment of confirmation bias because you at least direct yourself to views that you might not necessarily be favorable towards, at least initially. That'll help prevent narrow-mindedness, and then also ask other people what they think and compare with them. You know, you have friends, colleagues, associates, coworkers, classmates, family members, and sometimes you might want to ask them, hey, what did you think about the report that we heard in this or that source? By seeing another person's view, sometimes that will give you a sense of perspective. Sometimes it'll cause you to gain some objective distance from bias and to see things in another person's point of view. And then analyze the media messages. So see if your analysis is rational or if it's driven by emotion. Note whether you have any resistance towards other interpretations of the information. Try to identify purposes of the message. Is it presented through misleading tactics, or is it just presented through rational argument and dialogue? So that's everything I kind of had on chapter 11 anyway. Let me see if I wanted to say a few other things about advertising. I do want to also talk about advertising. But here's the thing about that, okay? So let me just say something really fast. Looking at the schedule in the syllabus, I had dedicated 2 days to this material on media and the internet. But if I really continue the full-on lecture today with the last 30 minutes, then I'm going to probably finish a little too early. And then I'll have to kind of come up with a whole new lesson plan for the second part of this meeting on what is it going to be, Monday next week. So I think what I'd like to do, guys, is to maybe end the class meeting today a little bit earlier than we normally would per the schedule, and to then sort of use the extra time to have some opening discussion on Monday about advertising and marketing. And then we'll watch some videos that I've found online that kind of also give a further sort of depth and reinforcement to the lesson about digital literacy, how advertising and marketing can sometimes contain fallacies. And so that's the kind of point on Monday. We'll talk more about commercials and advertising and marketing impressions, not just media more broadly. So Monday's all about like commercials and advertising. And then next week on Wednesday, it says that let me make sure I'm telling you the right info. I'm looking at the syllabus myself. Yeah, so Wednesday the 14th, it says videos on media and digital literacy. I was gonna just send you guys a compilation of some videos from the Crash Course academic series. And they talk about digital literacy. They have like 8 different episodes, which are kind of short, maybe like 10 minutes each. So my lesson plan for the Wednesday next week is not actually to have another typical lecture meeting like this, but to just send you those links and have you watch them in substitute. So one meeting of the semester where you'll just be watching videos on your own, and we won't have to have the typical class. So anyway, long story short, I'm going to cut this meeting a little bit earlier today. That'll give us ample time on Monday to have a full meeting on marketing and advertising. And then Wednesday next week, I'm just going to forward you guys some videos. Also, on Monday, after we finish that discussion, I'll be ready to give you the directions for your third homework assignment. And that third homework assignment would be due on the 21st. So you'll have like 9 days basically to work on it once I assign it next Monday. So guys, how does this sound? Are we all good to go? Sorry to let us go a little early, but maybe that's not such bad news for some of us that can get on to the next thing in the day a little bit earlier. So let's see in the chat if everyone's good to go. And if so, then I'll break. We'll meet on Monday, talk about chapter 10. So read those pages in chapter 10 that are stated in the syllabus for Monday. And then that's going to be our focus then, followed by some videos to be delivered afterward. Okay then, well, so good. Nice to see you guys. Thanks, Margarito, Brenda, Nancy, and all the rest. I'll catch up with you then on Wednesday. If you need anything in the meantime, please email me. And if you have emailed me for any reason, I'm going to get to it. I'm just going through them each day. All right then, have a good one, and until next time. All right, bye-bye.